My name is Steve Topletz. I'm the operations advisor for ZeroBank, an anonymous VPN corporation. And today we're going to be speaking about global spying, realistic probabilities, and modern signals intelligence. I'm joined by Mr. Kyle Williams. He is the security director at ZeroBank, and he is also one of the founders of Janus VM project, which develops privacy and anonymity software. Unfortunately, the third speaker, Mr. Jonathan Logan of CryptoHippie, could not be here today. He has been detained in Europe. I'm not kidding. You're about to find out. Okay, today we're going to be talking about what we're going to call theory. All right. The way that mass surveillance systems work, the way that the NSA's internal spy program works. We all have some different ideas of the way we think these things work, that they're a little ambiguous. We know that they're out there, they're nebulous ideas, but we really can't penetrate into the NSA or other intelligence organizations and see what's going on, what they're really after. One of the things that we all know about is they originally told us in the US that, oh, we don't spy on Americans. And then it was, well, we only listen to foreign communications. Well, that's not the case at all. Normally, it is considered impolite and repugnant to talk about economics and politics. I would agree, especially given these two cases. Today, we're going to talk about something much cooler. The intersection of economics and politics, which is technology and game theory. These have realistic applications in surveillance. Another little notation, some of y'all have heard, we sent out a little flyer. At the end of this conference, we will be detailing and revealing a spy network that has been operating for nearly a decade globally. It has not come to light before. It has been operating massively and quite maliciously, as you'll see. And we'll be happy to provide proof, Wireshark logs, etc., and a full 45-minute video audit. Okay, let's start with the kind of surveillance we're talking about. We're going to be talking about digital surveillance. When a lot of people think about surveillance, they think of analog, like just phones, okay? That's plain old telephone systems. And in the 1980s, you would have been right. In the 1980s, they developed a system called Echelon. Echelon is a cooperative between the United States and the UK. And what they do, or what they did do, is they focus primarily on terrestrial radio signals. That means Wi-Fi, if there was any. That means direct burst microwave transmissions. That means satellite transmissions. And that can also mean copper lines. What it did not do, and what a lot of people have mistaken, is they thought it also did fiber optics. Well, back in the 80s, there really weren't a whole lot of fiber optics, so it really wasn't something that was targeted. It was a minimal communications medium, not exactly what it is today. A lot of people think that, well, how do you really tap fiber? I talk to industry professionals and they say, well, you can't really cut fiber without anybody knowing about it. Well, there's techniques out there. You don't have to cut the fiber. Nobody will notice. The way it's done is by capturing ghost photons. This was demonstrated back in the early 90s in a few different papers. Now it's to such a science where a fiber optic line can be tapped and duplicated with shadow routing in a matter of seconds. Over here, we show what happens. Basically, they take a fiber optic wire and they bend it around and some of the stray photons come out. And then they have an optical detector which turns it back into a digital signal. It doesn't disrupt the flow of light normally, and everything keeps going without anybody knowing better. When we think of surveillance and we think of spying, this is often the area that comes to mind. This is the NSA headquarters in Baltimore. Now, a lot of us are familiar with NSA, but some other organizations we may not be familiar with are those that operate outside the US. We're going to detail how those work as well. They operate under a similar framework. We are especially going to be talking about Germany's surveillance system, which is, I'd say it probably rivals the US. When people think of the internet, they think of it as circuits. They think of it as tubes, right? Well, in packet networks, that's not the way it works. And in surveillance, that's not the way it works either. It's all about net flows. The way you think about net flows is, imagine a stream. You can't see the specific data going down, but if you dump a bunch of little rubber duckies in the stream, you can see which way they flow and where they're going. And if you reverse that, you can see where they came from as well. Surveillance is easily possible over packet networks. I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of surveillance, at least in the US, and what it's like. As you can see from this map, this details where the fiber optic routes are between the eastern and western hemispheres. If you wanted to, say, capture at least 90% of all traffic traveling from the eastern to western hemisphere, how many points do you think you'd have to tap? How many fiber optic wires? Anybody have a guess? 7. 7 different points is all it takes. There are 7 IXs where all of this information is centralized. You could actually pick, about 30 of the 45 landing points or 30 of the fiber optic lines and capture about 85 to 90%. But if you want to get real about it, 7 is all you need for internet exchanges. Now, internet exchanges, some people may not be aware, but when you have all these fiber optic lines and they have to peer with each other and they have landing points, they all co-locate into the same location where they can peer and they can exchange data across networks that are not just at data centers or small peering points. These are the specific fiber optic lines that I was talking about. As you can see, there really aren't that many that you have to go for. And as you can tell, they travel across and then they peer to very few locations. They're coming in at around Washington, all over California. You see a little bit coming across Florida, and the rest are coming in through New York. It's a lot easier than people think it is. Now, if we were going to talk about these 7 different points, this is kind of what it would look like. It's actually very simple. The processing of once you get to these areas is a little bit different though, and that's where real surveillance takes place. Because surveillance isn't just about, we have access. Access is a difficult part, but it's all about turning data into intelligence and then making that intelligence actionable. All right, some of y'all recognize this. Y'all know who this is? All right, it's from that TV movie about John Nash. And he's famous for what's called a Nash equilibrium. Now, a Nash equilibrium is an economic term that simply means that players are going to play to their best what's most advantageous to them. And they're not going to switch from those if there's no marginal reason to do so. Okay. Getting into mass surveillance systems, these are the internals of how they work. There's access, storage, transfer, and analysis components. Not only are we going to get into how they work, I'm going to show you just how cheap and inexpensive it is to surveil the entire internet. Can you believe it would cost less than what your domestic country spends on a police force? Every single bit of unique traffic in the world. Now, when you talk about areas like this, you have to get access to them first. Access doesn't come easily. If you are the sovereign of the country like the US, you can simply go up to AT&T's offices and say, hey, we're putting fiber optic taps or establishing shadow routes or doing whatever we want to do. Well, that's not exactly how the way surveillance works. A lot of surveillance is clandestine. That means that the US is going into other countries, illegally or otherwise, whatever they think is in their best interest, and gaining access to traffic and routing that they wouldn't normally have access to. Now, a lot of y'all remember Iran had an amazing coincidence where 5 fiber optic wires were cut, just one day after another. Now, wasn't that just amazing? Now, fiber optic wires do get clipped all the time, and a coincidence like this is bound to happen. But it's a happy coincidence. If it wasn't on purpose, it would almost certainly create a fantastic opportunity for any countries in the area who wanted to spy on Iran to install fiber optic taps when the lines were being repaired. Now, how would you install fiber optic taps on undersea cables? You'd have to have, divers or something like that. Well, let me introduce to you the USS Jimmy Carter. The USS Jimmy Carter is supposedly a NSA sub that has been modified for specifically fiber optic cable cutting and tapping. This was retrofitted, I think a decade ago, by a corporation called General Dynamics. I think it cost a few $1 billion to do so. I hope they got their money's worth. If we look at the finances a little bit later that I'm going to show you, you'll probably agree they will. Okay, we think of traffic, we think of spying. We go, say, at the NSA. Now, where does spying really begin? Now, if we're talking about access, it all starts at home. Home for many of you is San Francisco. So what happened in San Francisco that we all heard about but weren't allowed to read about and weren't allowed to know about? In fact, the judge and Congress weren't allowed to know about it either. Today you're going to find out. All right, this is the Folsom AT&T building in San Francisco. This is the infamous room 641A, behind which was discovered a device by Mark Klein called a NARIS box. Now this NARIS STA, that stands for Semantic Traffic Analyzer, is a very powerful device. Basically, it can take all traffic going through that office, gigabits and terabits per second if it has to, and do deep packet inspection and traffic analysis on them. Now, what would you do in that tiny little room? That's not exactly the data warehouses that we've been accustomed to or that we've heard about that are going to cost a fortune. What's done is first access is established. This is where AT&T works with the NSA to establish a shadow route. A shadow route basically takes all traffic coming from one interface and out another and creates a virtual interface where it mirrors all the traffic too, and nobody's the wiser. How would you create a shadow route specifically? Well, there's a couple different methods to do so, and that's IPsec, ESP technology, or a GRE tunnel. And where are these done? Well, not just like places in San Francisco and a central tapping point, but also landing stations where the fiber comes in off of the water before it gets to an internet exchange. These are excellent places to put them because who's going to look around in the water? All right, we go back to the storage mechanism. Now, back in 2007, and I don't know if y'all are aware of this, but Italy was very proud of a new data retention system that it created. It was called Dragon, and it was created for them by none other than Hewlett-Packard. Hewlett-Packard's very helpful in these regards, as are a lot of very big companies. And what they do is basically take the access, and after the access has been filtered down to the unique traffic, they proceed to store it for them. Now, backing up a little bit, anybody know how much traffic there is on the internet? 90 exabytes a year currently. Now, traffic doubles about once every year right now. So let's say, how much would it cost to store 90 exabytes of traffic, 1 year of all internet traffic? The answer is $33 billion. Now, $33 billion is pretty outrageous. If you're thinking it's outrageous, you're right. A thing about access is they don't have to store every little bit or byte. Access means that they're very smart. They have fiber optic taps with traffic analyzers on there that hook up to remote systems that do hash and data tagging. That means they don't have to capture everybody's traffic. They only have to capture the unique traffic. Google's logo, you hit Google's webpage every day, a few times a day. And every day, every time you do it, it transfers the Google logo across the internet. Well, the surveillance system doesn't have to keep on looking at Google's logo every time it does it and do traffic analysis on it. It sees it one time, categorizes it as a data tag, and never visits it again. That means that these devices can visit and take all internet traffic and boil it down to the unique traffic. Everything else is clutter, fluff, it's already seen before. So 1% of the unique traffic has about 1% of the storage cost. We've estimated it to be around 330 million on the low end and about 500 million on the high end to capture all unique traffic on the internet. That's just for the storage. Now, this details the specific amount of traffic that there is. This was run by iPoke out of Germany, I believe. They develop deep packet inspection technologies and hardwares. This shows that all the real unique traffic, which is basically IM, VoIP, and chat and email, is about 1% of all the traffic that's out there. Everything else is duplicate and not worthy of even talking about. All right, now how does surveillance work? You have access, you have storage. What's the physical mechanisms that make it work? Well, you have your taps that have to be in the physical location. These taps are the fiber optic taps that you saw before. These are routers that have had shadow routes established on them that go to miniature storage devices. And these miniature storage devices have traffic analysis on them. And once they've sorted out all the unique traffic, only then do they send it on to a smaller little area called a collection location. That means if you had a data center that was busted into or had a wall explode for no reason at all, like what happened at the Planet in Dallas earlier last year, that would be an excellent time to install a tap. And you could have the tap run shadow routes on off-peak hours just to the collection location for the unique traffic, and nobody would be the wiser. Now, once the unique traffic is at the collection location, it begins its initial analysis. That's where a lot of the processing takes place. Okay, let me go over the costs a little bit for you. Okay, I told you that the traffic analyzers cost around 500 million, I think. The way that we got to this number is we took a bunch of different averages of devices like the NARIS, Sandvines boxes, Shadow Meter, LSS, I think, and all of them boiled down to about 4.5K per gigabit per second. Now, 4.5K per gigabit per second, that's quite a bit. Let me bring this up real quick. All right. Now, if you have not a whole lot of unique traffic, that means suddenly you can do a lot more analysis. The taps themselves are a little bit harder to get in place. Taps are where they install the fiber optic tap, it gets underwater, it gets into the data center, somebody has to be bribed, somebody has to be coerced, or a warrant is served. If it's overt or covert, it makes differences. But let's say it cost about $3 million per year. There are about 5,000 different places you would need to tap to gain full, complete access to all internet traffic. And I mean, that includes small little pockets of local traffic in Germany. That includes transnational traffic that crosses Sweden. Now, an interesting thing about Sweden, if we detour for a second, a lot of people think, oh, Sweden, yeah, the Pirate Bay, and oh, they've got this thing called Relax VPN, and those people really care about our rights and our privacy. Well, what they don't really mention is that these countries have amazing surveillance systems that are not necessarily on the books. The Swedish police got busted for using a secret surveillance system on all of their traffic and then went and tried to make it retroactively legal. Anybody hear of anything like that before? Well, that's not really publicized, is it? At least not in the US. It's known in Europe, though. Another funny thing about surveillance in Sweden is that Sweden not only logs all the traffic coming into their country, but they log all trans-domestic traffic. If traffic's going across the Swedish border from one country to another country and doesn't have any destination or legitimate reason to be tapped in Sweden, doesn't matter. They listen to it anyways. They're kind of like a nosy neighbor. He goes out to his mailbox and gets his mail and reads through it, and while he's there, he goes and reads yours too. Real nice guys. Okay, so going back to storage costs, can you bring up the PDF? All right. Now, the storage costs are high. High relatively compared to just, say, regular hard drives. which you'd be storing at about, half a cent, or maybe 5 cents per gigabyte. Let me go down to specs. Okay. You get these different breakdowns. The storage cost of all unique internet traffic is about $570 million a year. If you go to our paper, we've got detailed analysis of how we came up with that number. Now, traffic's an interesting thing. Some people might think, well, traffic's certainly going to be expensive, especially if you run a web service. Well, the only time that they have to actually use the traffic is, if we go back, in between these 2 points, between the tap and the collection location, and between the collection location and over to the data warehouse, which we'll discuss in a little bit. The only thing that they're transferring is the 1% of all internet traffic, the little unique bit. So keeping that available is a relatively low cost. Now, the analysis is probably the most expensive part, and it is the most advanced, and we'll get into that in a second. The point being, I want you to take away from this figure. To surveil the entire internet with, these are inflated numbers that we're using. These are not cutting corners or, guesstimating small amounts. To surveil the entire internet only costs about $4.1 billion. Anybody know how much we spend on defense, or how much the NSA's black ops budget is? About $45 billion a year. Very small cost for excellent value if you were looking at for an intelligence investment point of view. Now, who would want to get all of this global information? The information is only wanted by unrestricted parties that are operating as sovereigns. If we had to say who it was that was interested in surveilling the entire internet and probabilistically saying that they are, it boils down to about 7 or 8 different countries. Those countries are the United States, the United Kingdom, France, Germany, Russia, Israel, China, and the up-and-comer Australia, which is somehow paddling out of the backwaters. Okay, once we get into analysis, that's where the real magic begins. You've got 3 different methods for getting to the analysis, and that begins with the classification, interpretation, reaction, and selection. Now, classification and interpretation are mainly computer-operated sort of things. They're very easy to understand. If we go back to these, you can see how these are going to work. All right, the way escalation works is it goes from the tap to the collection location and trickles upstream into the data warehouse. There's more and more processing that's done as it gets up there, and it gets of higher and higher relevance and importance. It gathers more attention the further it gets up there. This is called the escalation of surveillance method. All right, getting into these, you have 2 types that are being used. There's context and content analysis. All right, the most surveillance technology that's being used to date is context. Context simply means that who transferred the data and what kind of data it is. Basically, it's what is the protocol, what's going on here. Now, there's a new technology that's been developed and bandied about in the last 10 years called DPI, which is Deep Packet Inspection. I touched on this a little bit earlier. All right, Deep Packet Inspection adds a lot of value to the context information. DPI means that we can, before we said, Kyle here reads a page on Google. That's what the context analysis showed. Now, when we use DPI, we get to say something to the effect of, Kyle searched for porn on Google. All right, now we get over into things like content. Now, content really ramps it up. Now, content is more than just the data type, it's the meaning behind the data and the information surrounding the data. Now, if you're doing surveillance, content analysis is very important and very, very useful on unique traffic. That's because unique traffic is almost always meaningful. Now, there's technologies that are being used with context and content analysis. I'll give you one example. The German special police, the BKE, I think it is, they have a special technology where they're using DPI to track child pornography currently. Or at least that's the auspice that it's under. What they do is basically they know the image and they generate a data tag from it, and they can surveil that data tag ever being transferred. And they can just watch the net flows back and forth. So if somebody thinks that they're transferring child porn from one server to another server, or anonymously sharing it, or doing P2P, and they think they're getting away with it, they're not. It's known the whole time. If it crosses their borders and they have access to it, they're known. They're on the list. It's done. Now, what's scary about this technology isn't that, oh, they're using it for child porn and, oh, it's kind of amazing. Well, it is an amazing technology. What's dangerous about it is the auspices that it's used under and how easily those powers are expanded, as many of us have seen in the last decade, expanding surveillance powers, especially those of y'all who are from the UK. Now, expanding surveillance powers means that one day, maybe they're not going to use it just for child pornography. Maybe they're going to start using it to track who uploaded a classified document to WikiLeaks. Maybe they're going to use it to discover who made an anonymous blog post about whistleblowing that cost some industry $1 billion or a bunch of brand image. There's a lot of incentive to doing this, and there's a lot of incentive to expanding your own powers. Now we go from classification over to interpretation. Sorry. Okay. Now interpretation means that the data is translated into a form that data mining can be effective on. It means we're no longer talking about Kyle and his proclivities. We're talking about what value does that have for our different targeting and tracking mechanisms. Is Kyle a target? Is Kyle interesting? Well, we're about to find out. It does additional things like semantic analysis on it. Semantic analysis is just a fancy computer word, meaning that the computer's trying to be real smart. It's seeing not just the words and finding out which ones are important and what a sentence means, but it can even do amazing things like right print analysis. For those of you who aren't aware, right print analysis is a technique for basically fingerprinting writing styles. If you wrote a blog post anonymously, depending on your spacing, your capitalizations, your punctuations, your indentions, your writing style, your grammatical usage, they can come up with a heuristic to say, this matches you with an X% of probability, and they can reach out across the internet to something you wrote a decade ago that was inflammatory during a political time and say, you know what, this matches too. We think that this is the same guy, and we're XYZ confident that it is. And it probably is. Now let's get over into reaction. Reaction is a less computerized progress, but it happens very quickly. Reaction are basically rules that have been programmed into these surveillance systems that are beyond what the computer could decide for itself. Before, the computer was saying, this is interesting, this is not, this is who this is, and we're following this net flow. Well, reaction could be something very interesting, like a topical subject, what's going on in another country, or a slang word that's being used that means something else. And it finds meaning, like time-sensitive meanings. Let's say somebody's discussing voting or discussing election results. Well, what if that election, the votes haven't been tallied yet? Or the votes have been lost, or something happened. Well, normally a semantic analyzer would see that and go, oh, votes, whatever, doesn't matter. Now, something that had strong reaction rules built into it would say, wait a second, there's something going on, like let's say in Iran. This is weird. The votes have been, we've already declared who the winner is, and the votes have been lost or not tabulated. It's kind of an interesting thing that the surveillance programs are able to do this. Now going on to selection. Selection is nearly the highest top of the escalation of surveillance. Now selection means that the data is combined with interest vectors and analyzed at the absolute highest level. It takes the things that we programmed before, the things that we found out about you before, and we assigned values to those and vectors to them, and we tabulate up what it means. What kind of person are you? Are you a nut? Are you a liberal? Are you somebody that owns guns but likes to go to church often? Are you somebody that you like playing soccer and you enjoy chemistry? And this machine knows, well, you like playing soccer, and you know who else likes playing soccer? People who live in foreign countries. This machine also knows specific information tags like, how well did you do on your chemistry exam? And it might think that those things are interesting. These systems can find amazing patterns and statistics that we can't possibly imagine. We say to ourselves, this little lie, we say to ourselves, there's so much traffic on the internet, they couldn't be watching me, or they're focused on the bad guys. That's what it is. This demonstrates that not only is it inexpensive and very easy to do, but if you have the slightest motivation and resource to do it, you have to do it. You have to do it to keep up with your neighbors, the Joneses. If China does it on their citizens and on U.S. citizens, well, the U.S. is going to lose ground if they don't do it on their citizens and try and do it on the Chinese citizens as well. China gains a competitive advantage there. I'm not saying it's a pretty truth, but that's the way that they view it. I wouldn't say that the governments and powers that be are the most evil and despotic things in the universe, but they have their own values and their own means and justifications that they use. And what we hear and what we're told is what they want us to hear and what they want us to be told until we discover otherwise and shudder through another truth. Okay, now, escalation of surveillance isn't just a one-time operation. It happens over and over again. And this is where you and I get caught up in each other's webs. If I'm an interesting guy, and being that I had my name written on this paper, some organizations might think that that's very interesting. If you send an email to me, suddenly, just guilt by association, you become a more interesting person. The cycle starts all over again. And then ramifications come into play. And you start all the way back over at classification, interpretation, reaction, selection, and an outcome is decided. And they say, well, you're a more interesting target, or we want to focus on this. And by the way, your friend is now interesting too. We're kind of going to look at him and maybe his third parties or fourth parties and see what's going on there. They have amazing systems that are designed out there for behavioral networking and analysis. There's a spy program that is being run right now by Nokia and Siemens, which uses people's cell phones and the coordinates on the cell phones to say, oh, these people hang out together. These people know each other. These people call each other at this frequency. It's amazing technology. And if you think they've got all this amazing data and all this amazing technology and they're not using it to their absolute advantage, you're being naive. They're going to. There's no repercussions for not doing so. So you get this cycle of escalation of surveillance. And what I do affects you and what you do affects me, and it's constantly reevaluating it. So we get back to the budget. We said that the total surveillance of all global internet traffic that's unique would only cost about $4.1 billion. Every organization, ever since 9/11 especially, is increasing their signals intelligence budgets. Now, their signals intelligence budgets are going up even further, and this isn't limited to just government organizations. This is also large corporations and entities that have a stake in their brand image, or that are subject to espionage, or might have a secret recipe or technology that could be stolen. All of them need to know about what their competitor's doing, not just so they can be offensive, but so they can protect themselves. They too are increasing their signals intelligence budgets, and they too are running these sort of things. Now, what are these signals intelligence budgets, and how are they acquiring this? Well, we've talked about the lawful acquisition methods, which is basically the NSA going to AT&T and saying, hey, you are in our country, you are subject to our rule, and you will give us access to this information. And by the way, we'll give you fantastic contracts if you agree to. Okay, you get into two different types of intelligence gathering when it's not going to be lawful intelligence. This is what we typically think of when we talk about black ops or the CIA or all these other things. You know, they have this amazingly huge budget of intelligence and surveillance, and yet we never really hear how they use it. And that's kind of the point. If an operation went successfully, as far as you knew, a cable was cut. Back about 5 years ago, there was a cable in Iceland, between Iceland and Ireland, I believe, and it was severed. I don't know that there were any boats out there at the time, but it was severed. The opportunity provided, if it wasn't severed on purpose, it created an excellent opportunity for that to be taken advantage of. Now, we talked about $4.1 billion being the cost for total global internet surveillance. Well, that's not actually true. That's only if you're one single entity throwing all your money into the pot and it costs you and you alone. If you are somebody who shares information like an ally or only care about certain domestic areas, then the cost drops dramatically. That means that you could potentially have the US surveilled and it only cost you $1.5 billion. If you wanted to surveil the Middle East, that might cost only $1 billion. Why? Because the U.S. has a data sharing alliance with Germany, and Germany has a very large vested interest in surveilling the Middle East, including Iran and Afghanistan. So they're happy to work. They're happy to share information. And that's kind of what Echelon was for back in the 80s. The UK spied on US citizens, and the US spied on UK citizens. And that allowed them to sidestep a lot of the legal technicalities. So let's say we believe somebody like the NSA that says we don't spy on Americans. Well, the NSA is accessing all Americans' traffic, and they wouldn't need to be in those landing spots if they were just wanting to look at foreign traffic that was coming in. If they're not doing it themselves, they're probably partnering with the UK and saying, hey, UK, why don't you offload this traffic for us and give us the results and do the queries for us, and tell you what, we'll analyze all your UK information, and technically neither of us broke a law. Well, that's great if you can do lawful interception. What if you can't do lawful interception? What if you are, say, China, and you don't have lawful access to go into Folsom building and install taps or create shadow routes in different data centers? Then you have to do clandestine intelligence gathering. And this is back to the black ops that we're talking about. Now, you have two different sources of access that you can get. And clandestine intelligence is very much like the surveillance escalation that we talked about before. They're still going to need access, they're still going to need storage, they're still going to need, off-site analysis. They're still going to need all of these things, but the way that they get their access to it is different. Now, you can use open source intelligence or you can use covert intelligence. Open source intelligence basically means public sources that everybody has access to. Now, public sources everybody has access to could be something like websites. There are information gathering companies out there that go and spider websites all day long looking for changes in airline rates, in oil prices, in stock availabilities, and they make their estimations based on that. They use open source intelligence gathering. The company out there was changing their flight prices, so they can make an estimation and say, okay, this company's doing well, they're keeping their seats relatively booked, and we can make a profit on that by estimating their stock price. And there are billions of dollars to be made on such hedges and options with just the tiniest little bit of information. If you can get the fourth quarter results before they come in, before the company even knows them, based on your ability to observe them, you can make a killing. Now, who would be in such a position to make a killing or to do this? Probably a lot of people. Now, back to open source intelligence. We already talked about tapping internet exchanges where all the peering is taking place. There's a thing called the Tor network that y'all are probably familiar with. This is an anti-censorship project and anonymity network. Now, it is participation-based. That means that anybody can become part of the network and route traffic for other people. The upshot is, if you participate in this network, you're like a miniature internet exchange. You get traffic coming in, you get traffic going out, and you can see it, you can touch it, you can feel it, and it belongs to other people, but you're just borrowing it for them. Now, if you wanted to be a malicious group and run malicious exit nodes to, say, spy on dissidents, you could. The people that run these, if you look at the Tor network right now, you will see a lot of very interesting things. You will see servers in China that have some interesting characteristics that Kyle will be discussing. You will see the ability to capture people's passwords, access credentials that they shouldn't have in areas they shouldn't have, which was done by a guy who was dubbed Hacker of the Year, I think last year, Dan Ingerstadt. Basically what he did is he set up a Tor exit node. Instead of just allowing people to exit their traffic anonymously through his network, he looped it back to himself and sniffed it and said, well, if I can do this and I'm an upstanding guy, I guess, what about all the evil people that are participating? Surely these people couldn't possibly, be doing anything wrong or exposing their credentials, especially not people that are running embassies or have access to national defense and infrastructure. Well, that was wrong. He published, with the full names and passwords, I believe over 100 credentials. That was to embassies and universities and financial institutions for just his own node that was running that he decided to capture. Now imagine people who say, it's open source. I can set up 100 nodes tomorrow and capture everything I want to about all these different people that are using it. And maybe I didn't capture their passwords and usernames, but I could see that their language in their user agent was Farsi. And I can see that these were certain sites that they visited and the kinds of things that they talked about. And I can begin doing statistical analysis. I can begin doing semantic and right print analysis and track this back to the person's non-anonymous blog posts and do very many interesting things. Now, that's a small little risk. When we talk about other things like covert intelligence, this is the traditional black ops, black bag sort of things. These are the things that you hear about, but don't really have a firm grasp on, probably because you never get to see them live in front of you. Spyware and massive Trojan networks like what was uncovered called GhostNet. And there was a report done by Citizen Labs, I believe, in Ontario, and they detailed that this was a massive bot network that was colluding and spying and using Trojans. And there's other ways to get the information. If you're, say, the US and you need to get into India and you want to surveil the traffic through India and none of your allies have access to do it or a new data center was set up, you have to get access. And if you can't do it legally, you're going through a covert method because you can't be overt about it. And that means that maybe you have to bribe somebody, maybe you have to blackmail somebody, you have to pay them to turn the other way. And this is where some of our figures came from in calculating this. We said that there's probably about 5,000 different taps worldwide. And if they have an upkeep cost of outrageously $3 million a year, that means only $1.5 billion to access illegally every single tapping site in the world that you'd need to gather all the data. It's time for a little hacker exercise. This is where we have a little bit of fun. I've told y'all the idea that we're discussing game theory here, which is part of the intersection between politics and economics. First, we've shown that total global internet surveillance is inexpensive. It's cheap. It's dirt cheap. It costs less than 1/10 of their total budget for a big country like the US. So if you're doing it, or you're not doing it, and say China's doing it, how can you keep pace? You probably can't. They're going to get a competitive advantage. What if the Western Bloc starts cooperating together? You get Russia and China and some of the Middle Eastern countries to work together, and they decide to start pooling and sharing information and creating sharing their tapping and access points and data on each other. And they start building up an amazing array of information and surveillance capabilities on the US. And don't think that they don't have them. We have the NSA monitoring us here in the US. Well, if you don't have the ability to be the NSA here in the US, the problem's not in China, the problem's not in India. They're already here. They've already infiltrated our infrastructure. They're already part of our networks. They're already seeing our traffic. They just have to go about it in the covert ways. They're surreptitious, and they have to do route theft in a different way. But route theft, like I said about the fiber cables, isn't about worrying about getting access to something that's impossible to get access to. That's because of routing resiliency. Routing resiliency is like dropping a boulder in a stream. Those net flows that were going to one direction are now going to flow around the boulder. So if you couldn't get access to the Folsom building so you could tap it, what would you do? What you do is you would destroy the bridge, and then the traffic, because of routing resiliency, routes around it to an area that maybe was easier for you to get through. If we had some BGP maps up, you could see that during Hurricane Katrina, you would have seen blackouts all over the area, and internet traffic that was originating and destined to those areas started flowing around those areas where the IXs and data centers were unable to go to. It was just like water around a boulder. So I'm going to need some volunteers who like free stuff. Do we have any volunteers? 1? Can I get 10 volunteers? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Please come up here. All right, actually, we'll do it right down here so everybody can see. All right, I'm going to divide y'all into team A and B. Okay? A. You get blue, and blue. All right. Y'all are team B. That's all right. Just look in your package.
Just wanted to make sure it wasn't going to damage it.
That's right. Okay. Now, we're going to wind the clock back a few decades ago. All right. This is going to be the Allies. This is going to be the U.S., and that's going to be the Western Bloc. We're back in the Cold War. Okay. It's spy versus spy all over again. All right. Everybody, open your little silly string packages up. All right. Now we're going to up the ante, just so we can get an idea of what game theory really means. All right, have y'all got those opened up okay? All right, have y'all got those opened up okay? Great, okay. All right, now I want y'all, the B team, to organize right over here, and I want the A team to get just right over here, right in this aisle. Okay, now, we're going to play a really simple game in game theory called the prisoner's dilemma. Those of you who have taken economics are going to know what this is and maybe where this is going to end up. Now, for there to be competition, there has to be something that you're competing for. Now, what would be worthy of competing for?
Hands up!
People like t-shirts? You like free t-shirts? Cute little t-shirts from Zero Bank that say, "We do it anonymously." Okay. Here's what we're going to do. Team...
Alrighty.
Shallow!
Oh, we got 50. Water back there.
Oh! Okay. All right. We'll get to y'all, don't worry. Everybody's going to walk out of here with something. Herpes. All right. All right, here we've got Team B and we've got Team A. What are y'all going to be competing for? Okay, we've said those cute little t-shirts, right? That's a great thing to have. Everybody's going to get a t-shirt if you win. And if you don't win, well, you're about to find out. Okay. Now, I'm going to ask the allies over here who represent the United States and the UK. And I'm going to take this by private ballot, and we're going to tally it up, and our results are going to be done. I'm going to ask them if they're going to be willing to spy on the Western Bloc. And I'm going to ask the same of them. Now, just hold on. Let me get the results real quick. If y'all decide not to spy, and y'all decide not to spy, then both of y'all get nothing. Now, if you decide to spy, and y'all don't decide to spy, y'all get covered in silly string, and y'all get all the t-shirts. Now, if y'all spy, and they don't spy, vice versa. And if you both spy, no t-shirts, and you'll all get covered in silly string. Now, everybody can't win, or can they? This is where Nash equilibriums come into play. There are certain levels of acceptable loss.
One question. What about non-state entities?
Okay. Are we talking about organizations like... Okay. Don't worry about it. We'll get to you later. All right. Now, I'm going to take a poll real quick. And it's going to be a little private ballot, and we're going to tally up the results, and I'm going to let y'all know, because I can't have y'all know what they're going to say, and y'all know what they're going to say. Otherwise, it'd be cheating. Where's mine?
That one was yours. There you go. All right. Oh, I forgot the camera. That'd be bad. Yeah, you deserve one. You carried this shit up here. You got it. It was awesome. That's why I'm doing it.
All right.
You got an Excel up there?
They're all XLs. What's that? Ooh. I've been misinformed. All right, well, it's a grab bag. This one has all three sizes on the label. What the hell? I don't think the people that made these shirts know what they're making. Oh, yeah. No. Nope. All right. Oh, y'all keep waving at me, and I only got so many left.
Okay, everybody, we have our results of the prisoner's dilemma. Anybody care to guess what happened? Was it any surprise at all? I don't know that it was. Both teams decided to spy on each other. Why did they decide to spy on each other? Because they didn't know what the other one was doing. And they did what was best for them, or with the information that they had. Either the people were spying on them, and they had to spy back, or they weren't spying on them, in which case they stand to win everything if they do spy. So in this case, they absolutely had to spy, and that was the Nash equilibrium that was reached. Now, what if we talk about game theory in different applications, other modern day applications, other less silly string applications?
I'm not planning on drinking any of that water.
Are you kidding? That's what makes it magic. All right. Kyle, I think that you have some very important things to say, and I think some of y'all got got these little flyers and heard about something that we were going to be doing, and you heard about it at the last minute, and, well, y'all are going to be treated. Just about everybody in the room, if we have enough.
All right,
First, we're
so
going to deal with these winners.
whoa, volume on this is really loud. All right, that's a little better. All right, so about 6 months ago, I got a phone call from Steve, and he was like, hey, let's play a hypothetical game. East versus West, in terms of hemispheres. And I'll play the West, and you can go play the East. I said, okay, well, why do you want to do this? And he goes, for fun. It'd be cool to talk about. So I said, all right, start looking into this. So did a little bit of Googling, found all the information that Steve just presented to you. So me playing the West, yeah, I kind of felt like I was being beaten up a lot because I didn't have much of a leg to stand on. So
How are we on time?
we got 15 minutes or so. So basically, we just decided to play a little game theory, and wow, we destroyed this stage.
That's what the goons are for.
So basically, it was like, all right, what am I going to do to fight off the West? And I got to figure out how I'm going to deal with the U.S. having about 90% of all the fiber optic cable, and I'm not really in the Eastern Hemisphere in a great position of leverage to do intercepting at the level that the West is capable of doing at this point. So at this point, I had to be a little bit more creative. I couldn't just go about it saying, okay, well, you could just start, doing BGP route hijacking, but that becomes noticeable. People will notice that if you keep doing it and doing it and doing it. And there's a lot of systems of that kind of stuff now, so you don't see it happen as often. So I had to start thinking about, well, maybe if I don't have the best offensive tools, I need to start thinking about my defensive. So what I came up with was first, secure my borders. Secure my country, secure my people, and make sure that this Kilometric power doesn't have, can't get to my sensitive systems, or in this case, get to my people as easily. So I decided to, take the biggest country over in Eastern Hemisphere, in China. They got the biggest population, and decided to go with that. So. Basically, the objectives were to censor my people, as the Chinese do, develop information reconnaissance techniques that were feasible and within my capability of doing, and also develop offensive plans or methods of going about attacking my enemy. Whoever that enemy may be, fill in X there. So, Steve, do you want me to tell people what you're handing out right now? So what Steve's handing out right now is a free year's worth of Zero Bank VPN service for everyone sitting in the room and during our talk on this. So free VPN right there for you. And all right, so back to talk. So what would I need? I would basically need a firewall. I would need filtering capability, and I'd need to be able to censor the information at a much lower level, more so on like consumer products. So you kind of see where I'm going with all this. In terms of reconnaissance, well, what do I need? I need a list of targets. Their physical location of these targets is definitely preferable. Who the ISP, the backbone, their AS that they're running through, who's the provider for my targets. All the information I can acquire about my targets, what type of hardware they purchased, what type of software they're running on these hardware, application versions, so on and so forth. So who has access to accounts on the targets. And oftentimes this can be found on a simple company website. You just go to the contact page. Hey, you got their first and last name. That's like half the battle usually. So you find out who's accessing your targets, and yeah, who in basically who, what, when is what you want to track from those also within your country. So what would I need to make this successful? Well, in terms of cyber offense. So now I want to play the role of the attacker. What do I need to do this, since I got a lot less resources or bandwidth or leverage, if you will, than my enemy does. So I would want to be capable of launching several attacks from several different locations at once. The reason you would want to do that, preferably, is plausible deniability. That's a big one when you talk about information warfare or game theory, is the ability to make it look like somebody else was launching the attack against my enemy and not me. And if you can pit these two people in a battle or make my enemy believe it was them that did it, you can cause them to be distracted and pit these two entities against themselves. So plausible deniability is like really big when it comes to cyber warfare. 0 days. If I'm going to be offensive, I gotta have the goods. That's it. I mean, if you want to be a successful attacker, you have to have good 0 days, and they have to work well. Also, large simulation of virtualized environments. All that information you previously acquired against your targets, if you know the OS version and applications are running, copy it, throw it in a VM, and that way you can just test it and test it and test it all day long until you find out a way that it's going to work, and then that would be a very targeted and specific payload that you can have a very good certainty is going to work well when you actually have to use it. Lots of bandwidth, resources, CPU, memory, and storage, and distributed data centers. Don't put all your eggs in one basket, is pretty much what it boils down to. So here's what we know about China's cyber defenses. China has this thing called the Great Firewall that filters both the connections leaving and entering the country. China's firewall basically, it also censors, the bad things or the unethical things that China doesn't deem appropriate for its citizens. But as Steve mentioned, and as many of you know, sure, it could be child porn today. What's it going to be tomorrow? If it's already in place, who's to stop somebody from changing the filter keyword and hitting enter? I mean, that's really what it's going to boil down to. So, and the latest one that we all have heard about was Green Dam. I mean, that was China's attempt to be like endgame in terms of censorship, to make the manufacturers that are going to deal, within the economy of China have to comply to this. Google did it with their censorship. Sony started shipping Green Dam. I believe it was Sony and HP and Dell were also starting to ship with that, and then Green Dam got ripped apart, people found exploits in it, and China backed out and said, this is maybe not the best idea, especially if this is our end game and it just got owned in 2 weeks. It's probably not a great idea to use this anymore. So yeah, that would have been a really cool way for China to get owned by somebody else. And if they had done that, that's probably what would happen. So that was their end game. We all heard about GhostNet this year. It was kind of scary to think that this might have been going on for a while, and this was very targeted. This wasn't like botnets trying to spread as fast as they could. These were very, very targeted organizations, governments. I mean, you name it, it happened in like over 100 countries. They had their hands in just about everything, and it was real low key. It wasn't until the Dalai Lama called out for help that the security researchers found this going on, and they had enough intelligence to be able to reverse this and figure out, for the most part, what was going on. And once somebody spoke up about it, other people started to speak up and said, I found a little bit about that, but I didn't find enough to really make a solid claim. And what your report brings to it, plus what my information has, makes this claim a lot more valid. So when GhostNet came out, it had the ability to log keys, it could turn on your microphone and your video camera, it could record what you were doing. Whether or not it's true, they can make the little LED on your webcam turn on and off, I don't know. Personally, if I have a webcam, it's facing the ceiling when I'm using it, end of story. But they could download and upload files. They can monitor your emails, your IMs. There was one case where a lady was trying to help people go from China into over in Tibet and support the country of Tibet and their movement to become free. And China pulled her in and said, here's your chat logs. We got you. That's it. And you're going to go work in a labor camp for 3 years. Or, that's it. You don't have a choice. And so that's really scary right there. And on top of it, they made Green Dam was very dynamic because they could download additional modules and just dynamic code as they needed it. Or if something new came out, they could just pull in the code dynamically and add more capabilities to it. So in the last 5 minutes I got to blast through this. Cyber reconnaissance for China. Okay, they're not the country that has over 90% of the world's fiber running through them. What do they do to get access to that? Well, I'm pretty sure my ally, or my enemy in the West, they're going to notice if I really start pumping, tapping a lot of their lines. They're going to catch on to that because these people aren't fools. They were smart. They set up the internet and it all goes through them. They knew what they were doing from the get-go. So I have to come up with a very creative way to gather intelligence. And a great way to do this, since they've already established the defense primarily, is to then begin working on the offense. Well, it's pretty much putting a stranglehold on you, and then they give you the key to the small little window and says, here's your opportunity, but you don't know it's them giving you the key. And I'll get to that in a minute. So basically, a way for them to do this is they can begin to start creating privacy and anonymity groups or nonprofit organizations or businesses that claim to be about freedom, privacy, and anonymity. You can usually spot these people because they will slander, lie, and attack those who compete against their organization, despite the fact that they should all be having the same goal. So there's Tor, there's JAP was free for a while, there's a couple of free anonymity services that have come and some of them have gone. And the goal of all those together was to just make information available and make sure that people wouldn't get in trouble for leaking the morally ethical or whatever information. And then these people, in terms of lying, slandering, and attacking, they will just all out try to eradicate the organization, and they will go to a lot of extremes to do this. They will buy off people that have double PhDs. They will just give them a ton of money to just say really outlandish things like Tor's getting people killed in Iran. Anybody who knows how Tor works knows that's full of shit. It just doesn't work that way. That's the end of it. Versus they don't go out and say, hey, yeah. Don't get me started. Whereas they don't go out and say that that one person that put up a thing saying, "Hey, everyone, start up a bunch of squid proxies so they can go ahead and start tunneling through you to get on the internet." Well, that's not intelligent at all. That's all clear text, and that's just absolutely retarded and just asking for trouble at that point. Because you feel secure, and then you're going to say some things that are going to get you in trouble if you get saying it. And that was the case with some people going on in Iran, but there was so many people going crazy and upset in Iran that they couldn't really just pick on a few. So they had to kind of deal with the whole. So I started thinking about this theory and how to put myself in this position. And then the whole thing about GhostNet came out. And I saw something in that initial report that had mentioned that they believe it was China. And I'll just run with that theory, since this is a game theory. We're going to say that was China. So they noticed in the Dalai Lama systems that all this data was going back and forth and being infiltrated from China. But the moment they started to clean up the system, people in China saw this happening. And they knew, we're busted, back out. Clean up our tracks, cover it up. And all of a sudden they started rerouting traffic through DynaWeb. A group or anonymity provider, I guess you can call them.
That's a good way of putting it.
That claims that they, are all about, free Tibet and, down with the Chinese government and their oppression, and so on and so forth. We've all heard it before. So I was like, And I looked into DynaWeb, and I found DynaWeb was linked to the Global Internet Freedom Consortium. And the Global Internet Freedom Consortium, or GIFC, has 5 products, and I'm only addressing 2 of these products today. One of them is gtunnel, the other one is UltraSurf. The other possible suspect for cyber reconnaissance is Tor. Steve talked about that. Anyone can get on it. Anyone can become a router. That hacker became, he did all that stupid stuff. And yeah, you can gather intelligence on Tor. We all know that. So I did an audit of UltraSurf, and I found out that it was scanning for SSL connections on military and US government systems, online financial institutions such as online banks, educational institutions such as colleges, core technologies, and CA registrars. And they were attempting to see if you could talk to these. They were also retrieving encrypted payloads by using Google Read and Google Docs as the middleman and cache. That is really, really smart way of doing it. And I never thought to do that. And that's really cool because Google has the infrastructure to support this kind of thing. A small adversary doesn't need to worry about it anymore. Google just cached it for me. Google will come back every 60 seconds or whatever and get a new update. Awesome. They're very possibly monitoring user connections at this point. There was a reporter back in January that got a great article and found some very bad quotes from them, basically stating that UltraSurf was going to sell user information for the right price, like all of it. And most recently with the upgrade they just put out a few weeks ago in response to Green Dam was version 9.5. And something very interesting, and I spoke with Moxie about this, and I can't seem to figure this out, so maybe someone else can figure this out for me. They're able to determine it's an invalid URL, a 404 error, inside a valid domain. So if I go to https mail.google.com, manually type that out, hit enter, it goes to it, no problem. Then I go to that exact same URL /foobar.html, and it redirects me to UltraSearch's or UltraSurf's search page. That is scary. And considering version 9.4 was scanning CA registrars in Canada, Taiwan, and the US, that really makes you wonder. I'll let your imaginations ponder that. If anyone has a valid solution, what could be going on with this, come talk to me. I really want to see it.
404 is the same size. You can categorize the web server the size of it. SSL doesn't match the size of the response data.
So they can be responding in size. Okay, thank you. Last one is gtunnel. Gtunnel works by making a quick VPN tunnel, and it goes over Skype, it goes over Tor, or it can go directly to their servers. It seems kind of odd that they would want to go ahead and say, hey, use Tor with our server, and then no matter where you go on the Tor network, you're going back to our servers, so we can funnel it through. And then again, Tor. We've heard it before. I don't need to beat it, and they're telling me to get off the stage, so.
All right.
Yeah, this was like a 48-minute video audit I did. I got an audit VM, clean white room VM basically, downloaded UltraSurf, started auditing the software. If you want to see how I did it, if you have any critiques or suggestions or anything, feel free to look at it. I got some Wireshark logs in there. I got before and after changes of the system, and I think I have like a couple of like the domains and IPs, like about 100 in there. That of the institutions that they were trying to scan from the client's PC.
All right, last two comments. The URL you see at the bottom, for those of y'all that got cards, you can get advanced instructions on how to use them for your OS just by visiting zerobang.com/blackhat. Now, for those of you that were less than technically proficient for what Kyle's saying, UltraSurf is a program that's supposedly run to be helping you to get anti-censorship and anonymity. And it turns out when you run this program, it starts launching attacks silently against national infrastructure, security, educational institutions, financial institutions.
I don't think attacks would be the way, but they are definitely doing some recon. So scans is a good way of putting it.
Kyle, let me ask you, these scans, what would happen if you were already logged into one of these machines with an authenticated session? Like, let's say you were somebody that worked at the Department of Energy and one of the scans hit the machine.
I don't know because I don't work at the Department of Energy, but it's really interesting to watch this thing behave if you route all your traffic through like a Linux VM and change what would normally be the external IP to just some internal 10.IP. That's really cool to do and watch what they start doing. So feel free to take a look. And yeah, that's it.
Thank you everybody for showing up.